Hey guys, tonight, let's do something very relaxing and very human. Dim the lights. Put the phone down just a little lower. Let your shoulders drop. Nothing urgent is happening. No decisions are required. Tonight, we're gently drifting through one of humanity's favorite bedtime thoughts. The absolute certainty that everything is about to end. Any day now. Possibly tomorrow. Definitely soon. Of course, it never does. But that has never stopped us from being extremely confident about it. So tonight, we begin with the apocalypse. Not the loud, cinematic kind with explosions and heroic music. No. We're talking about the quiet, deeply awkward, historically accurate apocalypse fears. The ones whispered in candlelight. The ones written in shaky handwriting by people who were very sure they had cracked the cosmic code. The end of the world, according to humans who were already exhausted, unnerved, and wildly stressed. Because nothing says clear thinking like famine, plague, and a confusing calendar. Now, one thing you'll notice very quickly is that humans have been predicting the end of everything basically since we learned how to count. As soon as calendars appeared, someone looked at them and said, "Yeah, this feels like it's ending soon." And once religion entered the picture, things really escalated. Because now the apocalypse wasn't just possible. It was scheduled, vaguely, with signs, lots of signs, and interpretations, endless interpretations. Let's drift back to some of the earliest apocalyptic thinking, long before medieval Europe really made it their whole personality. Ancient cultures often believed time itself was cyclical. Worlds were born, destroyed, and reborn again. Which sounds comforting until you realize it also meant destruction was inevitable. You didn't avoid the end. You just waited for your turn. Ancient Mesopotamians believed the gods could simply lose patience and reset everything. Ancient Hindus imagined vast cosmic cycles, where entire universes expired like tired breaths. Very poetic. Also mildly unsettling if you're trying to sleep near a fire and wondering whether the cosmos is on a timer. But things get especially interesting once we reach the Judeo-Christian tradition, because now the apocalypse becomes personal, specific narrative-driven. There are characters, there are rules, there is judgment. And there is always someone absolutely convinced they are living in the final chapter. Of course they were. They always are. Early Christians were certain the end was imminent. Like, extremely imminent. Jesus himself was expected back any minute. People sold possessions. Others stopped planning for the future entirely. Why bother planting crops if reality is about to be shut down? Spoiler, reality did not shut down. It just kept going. Awkwardly, so the narrative had to adjust. The apocalypse was still coming. Just later. Definitely later, but still soon. Always soon. As centuries passed, this expectation never fully faded. It simply adapted. Plagues happened, and everyone said, "Ah yes, this is it." Empires fell, and people nodded knowingly. "See? Told you." Comets appeared in the sky, and entire populations panicked. Because nothing says divine judgment like a bright thing doing math in the heavens. Let's float into medieval Europe now. Because this is where apocalyptic anxiety really settles in and unpacks its bags. Medieval life was already exhausting. Disease was constant. Death was visible. Most people didn't live very long. So the idea that the world itself might also be sick and nearing death felt relatable. The Book of Revelation became everyone's favorite source of bedtime stress. Symbols were decoded. Numbers were obsessed over. Every earthquake, every famine, every strange birth defect was carefully logged as evidence that the end was unfolding exactly as predicted. And kings were not immune to this thinking. In fact, they were often worse, because nothing amplifies apocalyptic paranoia like absolute power and very little sleep. Several medieval rulers were deeply convinced they were living in the final age. Some attempted to rule more piously. Others panicked. A few leaned into it and became aggressively dramatic. Because if the world is ending anyway, why not double down? One of the most famous apocalyptic moments arrives with the year 1000. You've probably heard the story. Europe collectively losing its mind as the calendar flipped over. People abandoning homes, repenting dramatically, waiting for the sky to open. And while modern historians argue that the panic was less universal than legend suggests, there was absolutely a pervasive anxiety. Clergy preached about it. Ordinary people whispered about it. The millennium felt symbolic. Nice round number. Humans love that. Round numbers feel important. They feel final. Of course, the year 1000 arrived, and then it left. Nothing happened. The world continued. People went back to work, which is perhaps the most historically consistent outcome of all apocalyptic predictions. Mild embarrassment followed by quiet acceptance and lunch. But the fear never really went away. It just rebranded. Later centuries found new numbers, new signs, new interpretations. The Black Death in the 14th century was particularly convincing. A third of Europe died. Entire villages vanished. Priests dropped dead mid-sermon. If you were alive then and didn't think this was the end, you were probably not paying attention. People joined flagellant movements, whipping themselves in public to appease God. Others turned to mysticism. Some just sat quietly and waited. Again, the world stubbornly continued. And then we have the elites. The kings, queens, popes, and nobles who were supposed to be God's representatives on earth. Many of them were quietly terrified. Some commissioned apocalyptic art. Others funded religious movements. A few tried to calculate exact dates, because nothing calms the soul like math-based doom. Fast forward gently, and we arrive at the early modern period. Printing presses now exist, which means apocalyptic ideas spread faster than ever. Pamphlets predicted the end. Astrologers charted doom in the stars. Comets were treated like divine memos. One particularly famous comet in 1066 had already been blamed for everything from royal deaths to cosmic judgment. Later comets didn't get off any easier. Even scientists got involved. Early astronomers tried very hard to be rational, but the public mostly heard. Something weird is happening in the sky, and filled in the rest themselves. And honestly, who can blame them? The sky had never been especially trustworthy. Now, what's fascinating is how often apocalypse predictions focus on elites themselves. Kings dreamed of judgment. Emperors feared divine audits. Some rulers believed their personal sins could trigger the end of the world, which is a lot of pressure. Imagine being slightly rude one afternoon and thinking, well, that's it. I've ended existence. And yet, through all of this, life went on. People married, children were born, bread was baked, taxes were collected. Humans are remarkably good at maintaining routines, even while believing the universe is about to collapse. It's actually kind of impressive. As we let this part fade out gently, notice the pattern forming. The apocalypse is never loud at first. It starts quietly, with whispers, with dates circled in calendars, with rulers staring at ceilings at night. It's a very human story. Fear mixed with meaning, anxiety dressed up as certainty. Let's just keep drifting, nice and slow, into the next layer of human confidence. Because if there's one thing history teaches us gently, it's this. Whenever someone says, "This time we've calculated it correctly," that is almost always the moment you should lie down and take a nap, preferably far away from them. After the early, vague apocalyptic anxiety of the first centuries, humans decided vague wasn't satisfying enough. We wanted schedules, timelines. Math. If the world was going to end, we wanted a calendar reminder. So naturally, scholars, monks, mystics, and the occasional king began trying to calculate the apocalypse. Because nothing screams divine mystery like spreadsheets. One of the most influential figures here is a man named Joachim of Fiore. A calm, intense, deeply sincere 12th century monk who was very sure history followed a neat three-act structure. The age of the Father, the age of the Son, and coming very soon, the age of the Holy Spirit, which sounded lovely, peaceful, enlightened, also suspiciously final. Joachim didn't exactly say, "The world ends on this date," but he strongly implied that everything was about to transform completely, which, as usual, people heard as, okay. So, apocalypse adjacent. Joachim's ideas spread quietly but deeply. Kings read them, popes side-eyed them, radical movements loved them. Because whenever someone suggests the current order is about to dissolve, people who dislike the current order get very excited. Of course they do. And then there were the millennial recalculators. Because once the year 1000 passed without incident, people did not think, "Oh, we were wrong." They thought, we miscounted. A classic move. Maybe Christ's death date was off. Maybe the calendar started wrong. Maybe God uses a different numbering system. Very reasonable explanations, honestly. Some suggested the real end would come in 1033, marking 1000 years since the crucifixion. Others chose 1260 or 1290 or 1335. Numbers pulled straight from prophetic texts, filtered through hope, fear, and selective reading. And every time, people prepared, repented, panicked quietly, and then continued living. What's fascinating is how elites responded to these predictions. Some rulers leaned into apocalyptic expectations as a political tool. If the world was ending soon, obedience mattered more. Donations to the church increased. Authority felt heavier. Fear is excellent for social control. Of course it is. Other elites reacted with deep personal anxiety. There are records of kings commissioning extra prayers, pilgrimages, and religious art specifically to prepare for judgment. Imagine ruling an empire while also thinking, I might be personally audited by the universe any minute. That's a lot to carry. And then there are the visionaries. The ones who claimed direct revelation, dreams, voices, signs. These figures appear repeatedly across history. They are often intense, charismatic, and deeply convinced of their own importance, which, to be fair, if you genuinely believe God picked you to announce the end of reality, confidence would follow. One such figure was Savonarola, the fiery preacher of Florence. He believed Italy's moral decay was triggering divine wrath. He preached repentance. He inspired bonfires of vanities. People burned art, books, cosmetics. Florence briefly turned into a deeply anxious self-help seminar, and Savonarola was certain the apocalypse was near, until, unfortunately for him, he was executed. The world, again, continued. What we see again and again is that apocalypse predictions are rarely about the future. They are about the present. They are responses to chaos, inequality, disease, and uncertainty. When life feels unbearable, the idea that it will all end soon feels comforting. It gives suffering meaning. It promises resolution. Even royal families were not immune. Some dynasties interpreted misfortunes, stillbirths, deformities, plagues as signs that God was displeased with them specifically. There are letters from nobles wondering if their bloodline was cursed, which, in some cases, genetically speaking, was not entirely wrong. But that's a different bedtime story. As we glide further, notice how apocalyptic thinking becomes almost cyclical. Every crisis reignites it. War, end times. Famine, end times. New technology, definitely end times. The printing press, for example, terrified people. Suddenly information spread too fast. Heresy multiplied. Surely this was a sign. Of course it was. And yet, quietly, humans kept adapting. Beliefs softened. Dates moved. Interpretations adjusted. The apocalypse became less about an exact moment and more about a feeling. A constant background hum of something is wrong, which, honestly, might be the most accurate prediction of all. By the end of this period, something interesting happens. Apocalyptic fear stops being purely religious and starts blending with politics, science, and personal psychology. The end of the world becomes not just God's decision, but something humans might accidentally cause themselves, which is progress, I guess. Let's ease back in, gently, like you're adjusting a pillow that's almost right but not quite. Because this is the part where the end of the world stops being thunder and angels and starts being paperwork and human decisions. And very tired men in fancy rooms saying, "This will probably be fine." As time drifts forward, something subtle but important changes. People don't stop believing in divine apocalypse. That never really goes away. But alongside it, a new, quieter fear develops. One that whispers instead of shouts. The idea that maybe God isn't rushing this. Maybe humanity is perfectly capable of ending things all on its own. This shift begins slowly during the late medieval and early modern period. Empires expand, weapons improve, bureaucracies grow teeth. Wars stop being small, seasonal affairs, and start becoming industrial hobbies. And for the first time, people notice something unsettling. The destruction feels organized, Take the 30 Years' War, a long, exhausting, continent-wide meltdown that made entire regions of Europe look post-apocalyptic, without any divine intervention whatsoever. Villages vanished, crops failed, disease followed armies like a loyal pet. Contemporary observers didn't just think this was bad. They thought this was biblical, as in, have we accidentally activated revelation? Rulers, meanwhile, were having their own private spirals. Kings began commissioning paintings not just of glory, but of death skulls. Hourglasses, allegorical reminders that everything ends, which is very on brand for people who had absolute power and zero emotional outlets. And then there was science, soft-spoken at first, just peeking in, asking uncomfortable questions, like how old the Earth really was, or whether celestial events followed laws instead of moods. Comets, once considered divine warnings, started getting tracked, measured, timed, which somehow made them more terrifying. Because if the heavens ran on rules, then disaster could be predictable. And if it was predictable, maybe it was inevitable. Enter the Enlightenment, a period often described as optimistic, rational, and hopeful, which is technically true, but it's also when humans realize, collectively, that they have built systems powerful enough to collapse catastrophically. Progress introduces scale, and scale introduces risk. Philosophers start talking about cycles, rise and fall, civilizations growing too complex to sustain themselves. Edward Gibbon calmly writes about the decline of Rome like it's a case study, not a tragedy, which subtly suggests that collapse isn't a divine punishment. It's a management issue. Royal families don't love this idea, because if empires fall due to structural flaws, then being chosen by God doesn't protect you from bad accounting, or nepotism, or marrying your cousin repeatedly until your jaw gives up. And yes, people notice the pattern. Dynasties weaken over generations. Mental illness becomes visible. Physical deformities are quietly hidden. Emotional instability becomes court gossip. The end of the world starts looking less like fire and more like entropy. By the 18th century, apocalypse talk gets secular, still dramatic, but different. Writers imagine futures ruined by human arrogance, by unchecked ambition, by technology advancing faster than wisdom, which is a very polite way of saying we don't trust ourselves. This anxiety intensifies with revolution. When kings fall, they don't fall gently. They fall loudly, publicly, sometimes without heads. And suddenly the idea that society could unravel overnight doesn't feel theoretical anymore. It feels documented. For elites, this is deeply unsettling. The apocalypse is no longer something that happens to the world. It's something that might start with them. One bad decision, one ignored warning, one overconfident reform. Napoleon, for example, didn't think he was ending the world. He thought he was fixing it. Many people who cause apocalyptic scale damage usually do. History is full of men who believe they were restoring order while quietly setting everything on fire. Meanwhile, religion adapts. The apocalypse becomes symbolic, internal, moral. Judgment shifts from flaming skies to slow decay. A society rotting from the inside, which, honestly, hits harder. You can't prepare for that with candles and prayers alone. And so, by the time we approach the modern era, humanity carries to apocalypses at once. The old one, waiting in the heavens, and the new one, sitting patiently in our own hands. The first is dramatic. The second is bureaucratic, and far more effective. Let's drift onward slowly, like turning over in your sleep, but not fully waking up. This is the era where the apocalypse stops wearing robes and starts carrying notebooks. Clipboards, eventually, and the tone changes. Less prophecy, more charts. By the late 19th and early 20th centuries, something quietly unsettling happens. Humanity becomes very good at measuring things, time, distance, energy. And once you can measure something, you can also measure how badly it might go wrong. Scientists begin talking about limits, finite resources, fragile systems, entropy, which is just a polite scientific word for everything falls apart eventually. This is not presented dramatically. No trumpets, no horsemen, just equations calmly explaining that perpetual growth is not a thing. This does not help anyone sleep. At the same time, royal families are still very much unraveling in slow motion. Emperors look impressive in portraits, but in real life they're anxious, isolated, and surrounded by relatives who are one coughing fit away from collapsing an empire. The Romanovs, for example, live in unimaginable luxury while quietly panicking about assassinations, illness, and the fact that their heir is medically fragile in ways no amount of gold can fix, which is an oddly perfect metaphor for the coming century. Then comes World War I, not described here with explosions or heroics, because that's not the point. The important part is the shock. This was not supposed to happen. Not like this. Industrialized death feels different, impersonal, efficient, like the end of the world outsourced to machines. Afterward, people don't just mourn, they reevaluate. Writers talk openly about civilization collapsing under its own weight. Oswald Spengler calmly suggests that the West is already in decline, like a patient who just hasn't noticed yet. This is not a fiery apocalypse. It's a diagnosis. And then, because history enjoys doubling down, technology accelerates. Electricity.radio.flight. Suddenly the world feels smaller, faster, more connected, which sounds nice, until you realize that collapse can now spread at the same speed as information. Panic becomes global. So does despair. Apocalyptic thinking adapts again. This time it becomes probabilistic. Not when will the world end, but what are the chances? And then comes the bomb. The first nuclear detonations are not described by witnesses as divine. They are described as unnatural, silent and blinding, like the sun breaking a rule. For the first time, humanity knows without myth, without metaphor, that it has the ability to end itself. Completely, accidentally, on a Tuesday. This changes everything. Suddenly, the apocalypse is no longer hypothetical. It's logistical. How many warheads? How many minutes? How many mistakes before it's over? Governments build bunkers. Leaders practice calm faces while holding devices that can erase cities. This is treated as normal, which is perhaps the most unsettling part. Cold War culture is saturated with quiet dread. Children practice hiding under desks, as if furniture has ever stopped a civilization-ending blast. Movies imagine wastelands not as punishment, but as aftermath. The end has already happened. The story is about surviving the paperwork. Meanwhile, elites remain deeply dysfunctional. Political leaders suffer from paranoia, messianic complexes, and the kind of overconfidence that only comes from never being told no. Many sincerely believe they are the rational ones. History suggests otherwise. The apocalypse, during this period, becomes boring in presentation, but horrifying in implication. It's not loud. It's always there, waiting, like a clock you don't look at because you already know the time. Religion responds by reframing again. The end times become moral warnings about pride and technology. Scientists respond by publishing risk assessments. Both, in their own way, are saying the same thing. We are not as wise as our tools. By the late 20th century, the fear spreads beyond war. Environmental collapse enters the conversation. Quietly at first. Ice cores, temperature graphs, scientists gently explaining that the planet has limits, and we are enthusiastically ignoring them. This apocalypse is especially uncomfortable because it has no villain, no enemy. Just habits, consumption, short-term thinking, which makes it harder to dramatize and easier to dismiss. Kings once feared divine judgment. Modern elites fear quarterly reports. And yet, the anxiety lingers. A low hum beneath everyday life. The sense that something is off balance. That the world is moving faster than our ability to emotionally process it. By now, the apocalypse has become ambient. Background noise. A concept we joke about, meme about, casually reference while making coffee. The end is near, but like, later, probably, after dinner, and that's where we'll gently pause for now. Because next, we'll float into the strange, exhausted present, where the apocalypse has gone fully digital. Where the end of the world refreshes every morning on your screen. Where collapse is no longer a future event, but a scrolling experience. No rush. Just let your thoughts slow. The world isn't ending tonight. Probably. Let's continue when you're ready. Let's continue gently, without standing up too fast. The present is a strange place to arrive in history. Because it doesn't feel like a destination. It feels like a loading screen that never quite finishes. By the early 21st century, the apocalypse stops being something you imagine and becomes something you check. On phones. On feeds. On dashboards with clean fonts and worrying numbers. The end of the world is no longer announced. It is updated. This is a new psychological shift. Previous generations feared singular events. A flood, a fire, a war. Something that would arrive, happen, and then be over, one way or another. But now, collapse arrives in pieces, in notifications, in articles that say scientists warn, followed by phrases like by 2050 or sooner than expected. Nothing fully breaks. Everything slowly degrades. Social media accelerates this feeling. Every crisis, everywhere, all at once. Fires, floods, wars, extinctions, market crashes. You see them while sitting safely on a bed or a bus or a sofa. Your brain, which evolved to handle maybe one village worth of problems, is now trying to emotionally process the entire planet before breakfast. So the mind adapts by numbing. Irony becomes armor. Memes replace prophecy. People joke about the end because taking it seriously all the time would make it impossible to function? This isn't denial. It's triage, a way of surviving information overload without dissolving into panic. Meanwhile, power becomes abstract. Kings once wore crowns. Nuclear generals held buttons. Now influence flows through algorithms no one fully understands. Decisions that shape millions of lives are made by systems optimizing engagement, profit, efficiency. No malice required, just incentives quietly doing what they do. The apocalypse, in this era, has no face. Climate change continues, not as a dramatic explosion, but as a long, uneven sigh. Hotter summers, stranger storms, disappearing seasons. Scientists speak carefully, because urgency gets dismissed as alarmism. Activists shout, because whispering didn't work. Most people stand in the middle, overwhelmed, unsure what action even looks like. This uncertainty is crucial. Earlier apocalypses offered clarity. Repent, fight, prepare, hide. Modern collapse offers complexity. Everything is connected. Every solution has trade-offs. Every choice feels both necessary and insufficient. So people freeze, not out of apathy, but out of cognitive exhaustion. And then there is loneliness. Hyper-connected, yet profoundly isolated. Communities dissolve into comment sections. Trust erodes. Institutions wobble. Truth fractures into versions, each with its own audience. When reality itself becomes negotiable, apocalypse doesn't need to arrive. It simply loses its meaning. Even elites seem tired now. Not decadent emperors or paranoid generals, but managers of decline. Press conferences replace proclamations. Apologies replace promises. No one claims to control the future anymore. They only promise to mitigate outcomes. This creates a quiet grief, a sense that something important has already been lost, though it's hard to name exactly what. Stability, perhaps, or the belief that tomorrow will clearly be better than today. The apocalypse, in this phase, is not an ending. It is a condition. People still fall in love, still make jokes, still plan weddings and vacations and careers. History has always been lived this way, even during plagues and wars. The difference now is awareness. We know the systems are strained. We know the risks. We carry that knowledge everywhere, like background radiation. And yet, something stubborn persists. Humans keep adapting, always have. New forms of community emerge. Small kindnesses matter more. People rediscover slowness, craft, local meaning, not as grand solutions, but as ways of staying human inside uncertainty. This is not hope in the cinematic sense. No swelling music. No final victory. It's quieter than that. More realistic. Hope as maintenance. As care. As choosing not to let the noise erase your inner life. So where does that leave us? Perhaps the apocalypse was never meant to be a single moment. Perhaps it has always been a mirror. A story humans tell when they sense they are living beyond their wisdom. A way of asking, again and again, whether this is how things must be. And maybe the real ending has never been destruction, but decision. Repeated, imperfect, daily decisions. Most of them small, most of them unseen. The world does not end with a bang or a scroll. It continues, unevenly, awkwardly, through people who wake up, feel the weight of it all, and still choose to make tea, help someone, build something modest and fragile and real. And that, strangely enough, is where we'll rest, not at the end of the world, but in the middle of it. All right, let's keep drifting. No sudden movements, no dramatic music cue, just a slow continuation, like turning over the pillow to the cool side. Now imagine very gently that someone in the far future is trying to understand us. Not tomorrow future, not next century future. I mean so far ahead that our skyscrapers are dust layers and our satellites are archaeological puzzles. Future historians love patterns. They always assume people in the past understood what they were doing. This is almost never true. They might call our era the age of knowing too much and doing very little, which sounds harsh, but also fair. We had data, models, projections, charts with alarming colors, and yet we mostly carried on, tweaking around the edges, hoping the graph would politely flatten itself. Of course, they won't see our inner lives. They'll see artifacts, phones, endless selfies, archived arguments, millions of opinions preserved forever, like emotional fossils. They'll probably assume we were deeply narcissistic, which again is not wrong, but incomplete, because beneath the performance was anxiety, constant low-level dread, the feeling that something important was slipping, and no one quite knew how to grab it without breaking something else. Future scholars might debate when the apocalypse really started. Was it industrialization, nuclear weapons, the internet, or that quiet moment when humans stopped believing their children would automatically live better lives than they did? That one matters. Optimism used to be default. Progress was assumed. History, people believed, moved forward like a well-behaved parade. Now it feels more like a traffic jam. Everyone honking. No one entirely sure who caused it. And still we worked. We loved. We worried about absurdly small things. A bad haircut. An awkward message left on read. The end of the world coexisted with very normal insecurities. Because the human brain is wonderfully, tragically incapable of prioritizing existential threats over social discomfort. Ancient people feared angry gods. Medieval people feared hell. We fear irrelevance, obsolescence, being forgotten while still alive. So we document everything. Photos, thoughts, feelings. Proof that we were here, scrolling at 2 a.m., trying to make sense of it all. The apocalypse in modern times doesn't arrive as judgment. It arrives as burnout. Systems stretch. People tire. Institutions respond with slogans. Individuals respond with exhaustion. Even rebellion becomes content. Even resistance gets optimized for engagement, which is deeply funny in a bleak sort of way. Earlier doomsdays promised meaning, final battles, moral clarity, good versus evil. Our version offers ambiguity. No clear villain, no final scene, just consequences slowly rippling outward from decisions made decades ago by people who are now names in footnotes. And yet humans are still humans. We still sit quietly sometimes and feel awe at sunsets. At music, at the fact that consciousness exists at all. Even in a collapsing system, beauty leaks through the cracks. It always has. This is what future historians might miss if they only read data. The soft stuff, the private moments, The quiet persistence. The way people kept going not because they believed everything would be okay, but because stopping felt worse. There's a strange maturity in that. Not optimism, not despair, just endurance. The apocalypse, seen from far enough away, may look less like a failure and more like a transition. Painful, uneven, full of mistakes, but also full of adaptation. Humans shedding old assumptions the hard way. Every civilization thinks it is normal, until it isn't. Every era thinks it is permanent, until it becomes a chapter. And we, right now, are living inside a chapter that future people will argue about endlessly. Was this the beginning of the end? Or the end of the beginning? Or just another messy turning point in a very long, very stubborn story? They won't agree. Historians never do. But maybe they'll notice one thing we rarely say out loud, that even while fearing the end, humans kept imagining futures. Not utopias, not perfect solutions, just continued existence. Another morning, another conversation, another attempt, which, honestly, has always been our most reliable strategy. All right, let's keep moving, slowly, carefully, like we're walking barefoot through very old thoughts. No sharp turns, no alarms, just another stretch of the same long road. Long before prophets, before calendars, before anyone bothered to number years, humans were already imagining the end of everything. Not because they were dramatic, though they absolutely were, but because pattern recognition is a dangerous gift when paired with imagination. Night came every day. Winter followed summer. Animals died. Fires went out. It made sense, in a quiet, reasonable way, to assume the whole world might do the same thing someday. Start, glow, fade. Early humans didn't need theology to invent the apocalypse. They just needed observation. When the sun disappeared each evening, it didn't guarantee it would come back. It just usually did. And that usually left room for anxiety. So the first apocalypse stories were small and local. What if the sun doesn't return tomorrow? What if the rains never come back? What if the herd doesn't pass through this valley again? Endings, at first, were seasonal. These weren't cinematic disasters. No fire raining from the sky. No final judgment. Just quiet extinction, hunger, cold, silence. The kind of ending that doesn't feel dramatic until it's already too late. And because humans hate uncertainty, they added reasons. Someone must be responsible. A spirit, an ancestor, a rule that was broken, a ritual done incorrectly. Because randomness is terrifying, but blame is comforting. Blame suggests control. If you angered the gods, then maybe, just maybe, you could apologize. So early apocalypse myths weren't about punishment. They were about negotiation. Do this dance, sing this song, paint this symbol. Don't eat that animal. Don't cross that river. Keep the world spinning. Keep the light coming back. And when it worked, when the sun rose again, when the rains returned, it reinforced the belief. Not that nature was cyclical, but that humans were necessary participants in holding reality together, which is a heavy responsibility for a species that was still figuring out fire. As societies grew, endings grew larger. Floods replaced droughts. Fire replaced cold. The whole world became the stage. because villages had become civilizations and local disasters no longer felt big enough to explain collective fear. Flood myths appear everywhere, and not because of one shared story, but because water is the most convincing destroyer. It's quiet, relentless. It erases boundaries. It turns familiar land into something unrecognizable. Floods don't feel angry. They feel indifferent, which somehow feels worse. So humans imagine floods as moral events. Someone messed up. Someone was warned. Someone survived because they followed instructions. There's always a survivor. Endings are more tolerable if someone gets to watch them end. That pattern sticks. By the time written history arrives, the apocalypse becomes structured. Timelines, signs, rules. Chosen people, villains. The end stops being accidental and starts being scheduled, which is comforting in its own twisted way. A scheduled ending means you can prepare, or at least pretend to. Kings loved apocalyptic narratives. Nothing stabilizes authority like claiming divine insight into the end of time. Priests refined it. Scholars argued over details. Common people absorbed the fear quietly, folding it into daily life like another background anxiety. Plagues happened. Empires fell. Comets passed overhead. Every generation was convinced this was it. Of course they were. Imagine living through famine, war, and disease without modern medicine, and not thinking the universe had had enough of you. And yet life continued. That's the funny part. The apocalypse has been predicted thousands of times. Calculated, proclaimed, preached, sold. And every single time, humans woke up the next morning slightly embarrassed, slightly relieved, and immediately ready to believe the next prediction. Because the apocalypse isn't really about the end. It's about meaning. If everything ends soon, then suffering matters more. Choices matter more. Lives feel sharper, finite. Important. An ending gives shape to the story. Without one, history feels endless, exhausting, and vaguely pointless. So humans kept inventing endings to make the middle feel tolerable. Even now, when we talk about climate collapse, AI takeover, nuclear war, or slow ecological decay, the structure is the same. Signs, timelines, experts, denial. Acceptance, panic, fatigue. The language changes. The impulse doesn't. What's different now is that for the first time, humans can cause their own apocalypse without mythological assistance. No gods required, just physics, incentives, and a surprising amount of paperwork, which removes the comfort of ritual. You can't chant away carbon emissions. You can't sacrifice a goat to stabilize global supply chains. You just live with the consequences of systems that outgrew the people running them. That's unsettling. Earlier civilizations could blame the sky. We have to blame ourselves. And that's much harder to fall asleep with. Still, just like our ancestors, we keep telling stories. Softer ones, darker ones, some hopeful, some resigned. Because stories are how humans rehearse endings without actually reaching them. And maybe that's the real pattern. Not apocalypse as destiny, but apocalypse as rehearsal. A way to sit with fear, to imagine loss, to practice letting go, just in case. If you're comfortable, we can drift forward again into religious endings, final judgments, Golden ages promised just after everything collapses, or we can stay here a bit longer. By the fire, listening to the oldest fear humans ever had. Not that the world would end loudly, but that it might simply stop. All right, still slow, still steady. No need to adjust the volume. Just let the words keep moving, like footsteps you don't have to follow closely. Eventually, humans decided the apocalypse needed better communication. Vague endings were stressful, too much guesswork, so religions began to tidy things up. They gave the end a script, a sequence, a personality, sometimes several personalities, arguing with each other, because, of course, they were. This is when the apocalypse becomes talkative. Angels start delivering messages. Prophets start hearing timelines. Dreams turn symbolic. Numbers get involved. And once numbers appear, things get very serious very quickly. Dates are calculated. Signs are catalogued. Entire lives reorganized around waiting. Waiting is exhausting, by the way, but humans are excellent at it. In religious apocalypse stories, the world doesn't just end. It is reviewed, assessed, judged, which says more about humans than about divinity. We like the idea that someone, somewhere, is keeping score. That suffering will eventually be acknowledged. That injustice won't get the last word. The apocalypse becomes less about destruction and more about sorting. Good here, bad there, saved, lost, rewarded, punished. It's very organized, almost comforting. A cosmic filing system for moral anxiety. Of course, reality stubbornly refuses to behave that neatly. Still, these stories spread because they offered clarity. If the end is coming, then daily life becomes simpler. Follow the rules. Stay faithful to endure. History stops being confusing and starts being purposeful. And when the end doesn't come, the stories adapt. The timeline was symbolic. The prophecy misunderstood. The test extended. Because nothing survives disappointment like belief with a good excuse. Medieval Europe was especially fond of this. Plagues rolled through. Crops failed. Kings died unexpectedly. Entire towns vanished. If you squinted, it absolutely looked like the end of days. People adjusted by becoming very, very serious about sin. Everything was a sign. A comet wasn't just a comet. It was a warning. A bad harvest wasn't weather. It was judgment. Disease wasn't bacteria. It was morality with symptoms. This created a strange emotional rhythm. Fear followed by repentance. Repentance followed by relief. Relief followed by boredom. Boredom followed by new fears. Rinse. Repeat. The apocalypse functioned like a reset button people kept hoping someone would press. Society was unjust. Life was hard. Death was arbitrary. Surely, the universe would step in eventually and straighten things out. Spoiler, it didn't. But the belief mattered. It shaped laws. Art, architecture, even time itself. Calendars revolved around sacred events. Clocks rang for prayer. The future was imagined not as progress, but as countdown. And countdowns make people behave differently. Some withdrew. Some became extreme. Some exploited the fear. Apocalypse entrepreneurs have always existed. If you can convince people the end is near, you can sell certainty, or forgiveness, or protection, or a really good seat on the metaphorical lifeboat. This didn't make humans evil, just human. Because when faced with the idea that everything ends soon, priorities collapse inward. Long-term planning feels silly. Compassion becomes conditional. Why care about systems if the system itself is about to be deleted? That mindset has appeared many times across history, and every time, it leaves a mess behind when the world stubbornly continues. Then something interesting happens. The Renaissance arrives. Science creeps in. The apocalypse doesn't disappear, but it loses its monopoly. The future opens up slowly, unevenly. Progress becomes a thing people talk about again. And yet, the end never fully leaves. It just changes outfits. By the modern era, the apocalypse stops wearing robes and starts wearing equations. It arrives as probabilities, models, risk assessments. It speaks the language of experts instead of prophets, which somehow makes it feel more real and more boring. No angels, no trumpets, just charts trending in the wrong direction. And humans respond to boring apocalypses very badly. Fear without spectacle is hard to sustain. Urgency without drama fades. You can only panic so long before exhaustion sets in. So we scroll. We joke. We cope. We invent small personal endings to distract from larger ones. Careers collapse. Relationships end. Algorithms decide things for us. Mini apocalypses, daily and manageable. The big one remains theoretical until it isn't. What ties all of this together, from fireside myths to medieval sermons to modern reports, is not a desire for destruction, but a craving for narrative closure. Humans want the story to make sense. They want suffering to lead somewhere. They want effort to matter. They want history to resolve instead of just continuing silly forever. But history doesn't care about narrative satisfaction. It lurches. It loops. It stalls. It repeats itself with new vocabulary. And yet here we are, still telling stories about the end, still listening to them at night, still finding strange comfort in imagining the last page, even when we secretly hope it never comes. All right. No rush. Let's keep going. Same pace, same low light. Nothing sudden. By the time we reach the modern world, the apocalypse has lost its flair. No burning skies, no divine announcements, no dramatic countdown clocks in the town square. Instead, it arrives as a memo, a report, a line buried somewhere around page 47. This is not the ending anyone rehearsed for. Industrialization changed everything, including how humans imagined collapse. When machines entered the story, the apocalypse stopped being a punishment and started looking like a side effect. Not wrath, not judgment, just unintended consequences. Smoke rose, rivers changed color, cities expanded. People moved faster than their bodies were designed to move. And slowly, quietly, the idea crept in that maybe progress wasn't an upward line after all. Maybe it was a curve, or a loop, or a very long detour. The 19th and early 20th centuries were weirdly optimistic. Considering everything, people believed technology would fix itself. That invention automatically meant improvement. That more power meant more wisdom, which, in hindsight, feels adorable. Of course they built machines capable of ending civilization. Of course they did. Give humans enough intelligence and anxiety, and they will always over-prepare for threats that may or may not exist. Nuclear weapons changed the apocalypse permanently. For the first time, the end of the world wasn't mythological or accidental. It was practical, engineered, scheduled by decision-makers who drank coffee and argued over wording. The apocalypse became something you could trigger on a bad day. That knowledge seeped into culture like radiation. Movies, literature, children's drills. Entire generations grew up with the understanding that everything could end in minutes. Not because of sin, but because of miscommunication. And then it didn't. The world didn't end. Not once. Not even during the closest calls, which created a new kind of fatigue. Apocalypse fatigue. The constant awareness of catastrophe without release. So people adapted. They compartmentalized. You can't live every day as if a button might be pressed. You have bills. You have dinner plans. You have a life that insists on continuing. This is when the apocalypse splits into. There's the spectacular apocalypse. Nuclear war. Asteroids. Sudden collapse. These get movies, bunkers, and passionate debates. And then there's the administrative apocalypse. Climate change. Biodiversity loss. Resource depletion. Slow systemic breakdown. These get conferences, acronyms, and PowerPoint slides. Guess which one humans struggle with more? Slow disasters don't activate ancient fear responses. There's no moment to point at and say, there, that's it. Instead, there are trends, gradual shifts, before and after photos that only look dramatic if you stare long enough. And humans are not good at staring. So the modern apocalypse becomes optional. You can believe in it. Or not. You can accept the science or argue about it. You can acknowledge it abstractly and still book a flight next month. Denial becomes polite, casual, bureaucratic. No one says, I refuse to accept the end of the world. They say, it's complicated, or there are differing opinions, or technology will figure something out, which is just faith, dressed up as innovation. The emotional tone shifts too. Instead of terror, there's resignation. Instead of panic, there's irony. Memes replace sermons. Jokes replace prophecies. Humor becomes the pressure valve that keeps people functioning. And honestly, it works. Sort of. People still fall in love, still raise children, still plant trees knowing they may never see them mature. Which sounds noble until you realize it's also how humans have always behaved, regardless of circumstance. Even during plagues, even during wars, even during real apocalypses that weren't theoretical, history doesn't stop for dread. The strange thing about modern apocalypse thinking is that it lacks an ending scene. There's no final act, no resolution, just a long middle where consequences accumulate and responsibility diffuses. Everyone is involved. No one feels fully accountable, which makes it emotionally exhausting rather than frightening. People don't fear the end anymore. They fear the process, the slow grind, the constant adaptation, the sense that nothing will dramatically collapse, but nothing will fully recover either. A forever crisis, and still, humans keep telling stories. Softer endings, post-apocalyptic rebuilds, quiet survivals, gardens after collapse, communities starting over. Because even now, The apocalypse is still less about destruction than about imagining what comes after. Or maybe what stays when it doesn't come. Not with a sound, not with a date, not with a headline that everyone agrees on. When the apocalypse quietly misses its appointment and just settles in. This is the strange part. The part no ancient myth really prepared us for. Because humans are very good at facing events. We're terrible at facing conditions. An event has edges, a beginning, a peak, an after. You can brace for it. You can mark it in memory. You can say, that was the moment everything changed. But a condition just lingers. It hums in the background. It becomes the weather of your life. This is where we are now. The modern apocalypse doesn't announce itself. It updates itself. It refreshes. It releases a new report with slightly worse numbers than last time. Nothing dramatic enough to panic. Nothing hopeful enough to relax. So people adapt in small ways. They lower expectations. They normalize instability. They joke about things that would have horrified their grandparents. Because if you don't joke about it, you have to sit with it. And sitting with it is uncomfortable. Earlier generations imagined the end as a clean break, a final line, a full stop. Our version looks more like an ELLIPSIS dot. Life continues, but altered. Not worse in every way. Not better either. Just thinner, more brittle, more optimized, less forgiving. People talk about burnout like it's a personal failure, as if it's a flaw in character. But burnout is what happens when systems demand endless output from finite beings. It's not weakness, it's physics, and physics always wins. This is why the apocalypse today feels personal. It shows up in mental health, in attention spans, in the way time feels distorted. Weeks blur, years vanish. Everything speeds up except understanding. You're always catching up, always behind, always vaguely tired, which is a very odd way to experience the end of the world. There are no ruins to stand in, no dramatic skies to photograph, just inboxes that never empty, news cycles that never resolve. Crises stacked on top of each other like plates no one ever clears. The ancient fear was annihilation. The modern fear is endurance. Can we keep going like this? And more quietly, more honestly, should we? This question doesn't get asked loudly. It's whispered, late at night, in private thoughts, in the pause before sleep. The kind of thoughts people don't post or debate or monetize. Earlier apocalypses promised renewal. After the flood, a rainbow. After judgment, paradise. After destruction, a clean slate. Our apocalypse offers no such courtesy. There is no reset button, only adjustment, only mitigation. Only choosing which losses to accept and which to fight. That's not a story with villains and heroes. It's a story with trade-offs, which makes it deeply unsatisfying to the human brain. So we escape into other endings. Zombie outbreaks, alien invasions, anything with clarity, anything with rules. Anything where survival feels meaningful instead of bureaucratic. Even fictional destruction is comforting when it makes sense. Meanwhile, real life keeps asking for incremental change. Recycling bins, policy debates, lifestyle choices that feel symbolic against massive systems. People swing between caring too much and not caring at all. Apathy becomes armor. But even inside this long, quiet ending, something stubborn persists. People still care about small things. They still fall in love with people who annoy them. They still adopt pets knowing heartbreak is guaranteed. They still create art that serves no practical survival function whatsoever, which is irrational, beautiful, very human. Maybe that's why the apocalypse never fully succeeds. Not because humans prevent it, not because we solve it, but because even at the edge of collapse, we keep behaving like a species that assumes tomorrow exists. That assumption is powerful, dangerous, sometimes, but powerful. It is the same assumption early humans made when they went to sleep without knowing if the sun would return. The same assumption medieval farmers made after bad harvests. The same assumption people made during wars, plagues, and collapses that absolutely felt final at the time. History is full of almost ends. Maybe that's the secret no prophecy ever quite captured. The world doesn't end in one clean motion, .frays. It It frays again, and humans live inside that rhythm, pretending it's stable because pretending is sometimes the only way forward. If you're still with me, still drifting, still listening, we can move toward the last strange comfort humans have always clung to. Not the idea that the apocalypse will be stopped, but the idea that even if it isn't, life will still find a way to feel oddly normal. All right, we can keep going. Same tone, same unhurried pace. Nothing you need to remember, nothing you need to do. One of the strangest things about humans is how quickly we redefine normal. Not because we're adaptable in a heroic way, but because we get tired. And tired creatures accept almost anything if it becomes familiar enough. Blackouts become routines. Shortages become jokes. Crises become background noise. Even grief, if it lasts long enough, settles into the furniture of daily life. This is not resilience in the inspirational sense. It's more like emotional muscle memory. History is full of people living through conditions that, from the outside, look unbearable. Yet diaries from those periods are filled with ordinary complaints. Bad weather, annoying neighbors, a meal that didn't turn out right. The apocalypse can be happening, and someone will still be irritated about a squeaky door. That's not denial, that's continuity. During long declines, people don't wake up thinking, "Ah yes, today I endure collapse." They wake up thinking about work, or children, or something they forgot to do yesterday. The end of the world rarely interrupts breakfast. This is why historians struggle to pinpoint endings. Life refuses to cooperate with neat timelines. Empires fall slowly. Values erode quietly. Systems fail in pieces. And while all of this unfolds, people keep hosting weddings, keep arguing, keep making plans they fully intend to keep. Normal doesn't disappear. It just shrinks. And when normal shrinks, people protect it fiercely. They cling to routines not because they're meaningful, but because they're familiar. Morning coffee, evening walks, the same show before bed. These small repetitions act like anchors in unstable water. Even ancient apocalypse myths understood this. After every disaster, someone rebuilds a house, plants something, names a child. Because rebuilding is how humans assert that time hasn't stopped. Modern life is no different. Even now, in what many quietly suspect is a prolonged unraveling, people still ask, "What's for dinner?" That question alone has carried humanity through more endings than any prophecy ever did. There's also a softer truth hiding here. Normality isn't just habit. It's hope, stripped of grand expectations. Not hope that everything will be fine, just hope that tomorrow will resemble today enough to navigate it. That kind of hope doesn't inspire speeches. It doesn't fit on posters, but it endures. When earlier generations imagined apocalypse, they imagined absence, silence, nothingness. But reality prefers continuity. Messy, compromised continuity. Even after catastrophic events, there are always survivors complaining about paperwork, which is funny and tragic and deeply reassuring, because it suggests that the end of the world, if it ever truly comes, will not feel like an ending from the inside. It will feel like a bad year, then another, until memory blurs and people stop saying before and start saying back when. Back when things were easier. Back when summers were cooler. Back when time felt slower. Those phrases are the real markers of decline. Not explosions. Not dates. Nostalgia creeping into everyday language. And yet nostalgia is also a sign of continuity. You can't miss something unless you remember it. You can't remember unless you're still here. This is where apocalypse thinking quietly turns inward. Instead of asking when the world will end, people start asking when they changed. When things stopped feeling possible. When effort stopped matching reward. When the future stopped being a promise and became a negotiation. These are private apocalypses, personal endings, and they happen far more often than global ones. Maybe that's why humans are obsessed with the big end. It's easier to imagine a shared collapse than to sit with individual disillusionment. A cosmic ending feels fair. Personal ones feel lonely. So we project. We turn burnout into collapse narratives, anxiety into doom scrolling, exhaustion into apocalyptic language. Because saying the world is ending feels less vulnerable than saying I am tired. And maybe that's okay. Stories have always been how humans externalize internal states. The apocalypse is just the biggest metaphor we have. If you're still listening half asleep, drifting in and out next, we can ease into the final comfort humans return to again and again. Not salvation, not survival, but meaning. Not the loud kind, the quiet, accidental kind that appears even when nothing is supposed to matter anymore. All right, we'll take this gently. No conclusions yet. No tying things up too neatly. History hates neat endings anyway. Even in moments when humans are convinced nothing matters anymore, they keep behaving as if something does. This is inconvenient for apocalypse narratives. Meaning is stubborn. It shows up uninvited. In places it shouldn't survive. In conditions that were supposed to erase it completely. People find meaning in routines. In jokes that only make sense to a few people. In shared annoyance. In caring for things that won't last. Especially in caring for things that won't last. That part is important. If you think about it, almost everything humans love is temporary. Seasons. Youth. Empires. Pets. Entire ways of life. And yet this has never stopped anyone from loving any of it. Which suggests that permanence was never the requirement we pretend it is. Ancient philosophers noticed this and shrugged. Medieval theologians argued with it. Modern people distract themselves from it. But the fact remains. Meaning doesn't depend on duration. It depends on attention. That's unsettling, because it means the apocalypse can't actually cancel meaning. It can only change what meaning looks like. During collapses, people stop chasing abstract goals and start caring about smaller ones. Who has food? Who is sick? Who needs help? Who remembered to bring the blanket? These are not heroic narratives. They don't scale well. They don't trend. But they are how humans keep functioning when the big stories fall apart. And this has always been true. When Rome declined, people still argued about property lines. When medieval cities faced plagues, people still wrote love letters. When industrial cities choked with smoke, people still went dancing on weekends. Meaning doesn't announce itself. It sneaks in. This is why apocalyptic periods are often followed by strange bursts of creativity. Art becomes more personal. Humor becomes darker. Music becomes quieter or louder, but rarely neutral. Because when the future feels uncertain, the present becomes sharper. Modern life has tried to optimize meaning, measure it, monetize it, turn it into productivity, which mostly just exhausts people. You can't schedule significance. You can't automate purpose. You can't scale fulfillment without draining it of the thing that made it matter. So when systems strain, people instinctively retreat to things that resist optimization. Conversations without outcomes, hobbies with no payoff, walks that don't count as exercise, thoughts that don't become content. These are tiny rebellions against collapse, and they don't look impressive, which is why they work. The apocalypse, in every era, has tried to convince humans that only the big picture matters. Final judgment, final outcomes, final scores. But humans keep responding with the small picture. Who am I with right now? What am I doing with my hands? Is there enough light to read? Is there time for one more story? Those questions have carried people through more endings than any grand ideology ever has. There's also a quieter realization that tends to emerge during long declines. One that doesn't get announced, but settles in slowly. That no one is coming to fix this. Not gods, not kings, not technology, not history itself. And oddly, that realization doesn't always lead to despair. Sometimes it leads to relief. If no one is coming, then perfection isn't required. Only effort, only care, only showing up in small, imperfect ways. This is not optimism. It's acceptance. Acceptance that the world has always been fragile. That stability was always conditional. That the idea of a permanent, orderly future was a comforting myth that worked for a while. And myths aren't lies. They're tools. And tools eventually wear out. So humans reach for different ones. Presence. Humor. Kindness that doesn't announce itself. Curiosity that survives even when hope feels irresponsible. These don't stop apocalypses. They just make living inside them tolerable. If you're still drifting along, still listening without effort, we're almost at the last stretch. Not an ending, just a place where the story naturally slows down. All right, still here, still steady. No rush to land this anywhere in particular. Humans have an odd habit. Even when the story clearly isn't ending, they keep drafting a final chapter anyway. Not because they expect it to be accurate, but because unfinished stories itch. Open loops are uncomfortable. From the first myths scratched into stone to modern timelines scrolling endlessly, people keep asking the same quiet question. How does this end? Not out of fear, always. Sometimes just out of curiosity. Sometimes because closure feels like rest. The idea of a final chapter promises relief. No more uncertainty. No more waiting. No more adjusting. Just an answer. History, unfortunately, refuses to cooperate. There has never been a clean ending. No curtain drop. No universal agreement that the story is over. Every so-called collapse is followed by something else smaller stranger. Often less impressive, but alive. And alive is the problem. As long as life continues, the story doesn't stop. It just changes handwriting. This frustrates humans deeply. We like arcs. We like resolution. We like to feel that effort accumulates towards something definitive. That suffering buys clarity. That endurance earns unending. But history doesn't reward patience with conclusions. It rewards it with continuity. So people keep inventing endings. Religious ones, scientific ones, digital ones, personal ones. Because imagining an end makes the present feel temporary instead of overwhelming. If this is all going to end soon, then maybe it's okay that things don't make sense right now. That thought has soothed more anxious minds than any meditation technique ever has. The apocalypse, in that sense, is a psychological tool. A way to place a boundary around chaos. A way to say, this confusion is finite. Even if that finiteness never arrives. You can see this pattern everywhere. Economic collapse predictions, cultural decline narratives, technological doom, moral decay. Every generation believes it is living at the edge of something final. And every generation is both right and wrong. Right that things are changing. Wrong that change equals conclusion. What actually happens is messier. Old systems fade. New ones form awkwardly. People who benefited from the old feel betrayed. People hurt by it feel relieved. No one gets everything they want. Everyone insists the story made more sense before. This is not the end of the world. It's the middle doing what the middle always does. Still, the longing for a last page doesn't disappear. Because endings offer moral clarity. If the story ends, then actions can be judged cleanly. Heroes and villains can be labeled. Lessons can be extracted. But as long as the story continues, judgments stay provisional. Heroes disappoint. Villains age. Consequences unfold unevenly. The moral ledger remains frustratingly open. So humans imagine an ending where the accounting finally balances. Final judgment. Final collapse. Final reset. And when those don't arrive, they imagine smaller endings instead. Personal reinventions. Burning bridges. Starting over. Declaring eras of their own lives officially over, even though memories stubbornly disagree. These micro-apocalypses are easier to manage. You can control them, or at least pretend to. History doesn't grant that luxury. It keeps going whether we're ready or not. And yet there's something oddly comforting in that. If the story never truly ends, then no moment is ever fully wasted. No failure is final. No meaning is locked in place forever. The absence of an ending is also the absence of ultimate judgment, which means there's room to change, to reinterpret, to forgive, to forget, to try again without needing permission from some cosmic editor. That's not a grand revelation. It's quieter than that. It's the realization that humans don't actually need the world to end to rest. They just need moments where the pressure eases, where the future stops demanding answers, where it's okay to exist without solving history. Those moments happen more often than we notice. In long walks, in late-night conversations, in half-remembered stories told just to fill silence, in listening to someone talk calmly about things that feel enormous until they don't, which, incidentally, is what humans have always done at the edge of uncertainty. They sit together, they talk, they imagine endings, and then, eventually, they get up and live another day. If you'd like, there's one last place we can drift to. Not a conclusion, just a gentle place to stop asking when the end will come and start noticing that, somehow, we're still here. All right, we can slow this even more now. No need to carry anything forward. No need to arrive anywhere specific. There's a quiet moment that happens in every long story about the end of things. It's not dramatic. It doesn't announce itself. It is the moment when the listener stops waiting for the ending and starts resting inside the telling. That's usually when people realize something slightly unsettling and slightly comforting. They're still here, not in a triumphant way, not in a we survived kind of way, just here, breathing, listening, existing while the universe continues being unfinished. Humans have always struggled with this realization. We like survival stories better than survival itself. Survival itself is repetitive. It asks you to keep going without applause, without resolution, without certainty that any of it adds up to something later. And yet, this is where most of human history actually lives. Not in collapse, not in rebirth, but in the long, uneventful stretch where people adapt to circumstances they didn't choose and call it life. If you zoom out far enough, this might look tragic, or absurd, or pointless, but zoom in just a little, and it looks familiar. People wake up, they adjust, they complain. They laugh at things that shouldn't be funny. They worry about futures they won't live to see. They make promises knowing they might not keep them. They care anyway. That pattern doesn't stop during apocalypses. It just becomes more visible. The end of the world, it turns out, has always been a background concept. Something humans think about when the present feels too heavy to hold on its own. A way of saying, this can't go on forever, even when it does. Maybe that's why apocalypse stories are so soothing at night. They take diffuse anxiety and give it shape. They turn 1,000 quiet fears into one big idea you can set down beside the bed. And once it's there, contained, you can rest, because here's the thing humans rarely admit. Most of the time, they don't actually want the world to end. They want permission to stop striving, permission to not have answers, permission to be unfinished without being judged for it. The apocalypse promises that permission, but it never delivers. Life does. Occasionally, in small moments, unscheduled ones. Moments when nothing is required of you except being present. When the future doesn't ask questions. When the past loosens its grip. when existing is enough for a while. Those moments don't show up in history books. They don't get preserved in ruins. But they're the reason people endure long enough for history to continue being written at all. So maybe the real ending humans are always circling isn't destruction. It's rest. Not eternal rest. Just rest. A pause in the pressure to make sense of everything. A quiet acceptance that the story is bigger than any one chapter, and smaller than the grand narratives we build around it. If tomorrow comes, humans will deal with it the way they always have. Imperfectly, anxiously, with surprising tenderness in places no one was watching. And if tomorrow doesn't come well, that won't be experienced as a story at all. Until then, there is this moment, this breath, this listening, this strange comfort in knowing that even after thousands of imagined endings, the most common human experience remains unchanged, lying in the dark, letting thoughts drift, allowing the world to stay unfinished. And that, quietly, has always been enough. You can rest now.
Today we will talk about a very old history topic. This story is from a time when there were no house, no cities, no schools and no books. This is the story of fire. Fire is not just a thing but that burns. Fire changed everything. Fire made human different from animals. Without fire there would be no food like today, no protection, no progress, and maybe no modern world. This is the story of how fire slowly changed human life step by step. Long, long ago, humans were very weak. They had no clothes, no proper homes, and no weapons. They lived in forest and open land. They were always afraid. Big animals hunted them, cold weather, hot there, dark nights scared them. Human ate raw food. Raw meat was hard to chew. Raw plants were bitter and dangerous. People got sick easily. Many people died young. Life was very hard. The first time humans saw fire. Yes, fire was not first made by human. Fire came from nature. Lighting heat trees, volcanoes burned land, dry forest caught fire. Early humans saw fire from far away. They saw bright light. They felt heat. At first, they were scared. Fire was dangerous. Fire burned skin. Fire destroyed trees. But humans are curious. They watched fire carefully. Slowly, humans understood something important. Fire is dangerous, but fire is also useful. Fire give heat, fire give light. People start keeping fire interested of running away. They carried burning wood from natural fire. They portrayed that fire carefully. If fire dead, life became hard again. Fire became like a friend. Fire and warmth. Cold weather was deadly before fire. Winter killed many people. People slept at night. Fire changed this. Fire kept human warm and people could live in a colder place. They could travel to new lands. Fire helped humans survive winter. This was a very big change in history. Fire and light. Before fire, night was very dark. Darkness brought fear. Wild animal hunted at night. Fire brought light. People could see at night. They could stay together. They could talk and think. This helped humans before social. This helped humans share idea. Fire created community. Fire and protection. Fire scared wild animal. Animal were afraid of flame. They stayed away from fire. Humans used fire as protection. They slept near fire. This saved many lives. Fire became a side fire and cooked food. This was one of the biggest change in human history. Yes, human learned to cook food. Cooked meat was soft. Cooked plant were safe. People became stronger. Their brains grew bigger. Good food gave more energy. Scientists believe cooking helped human become intelligent. Fire helped create the human brain. Fire and tools. Fire helped humans make tools. They hardened wood in fire. They shaped stone using heat. Later, fire helped me melt metal. This lead to copper tools. They bronze tools. They iron tools. Fire started technology. Fire and caves. Human lived in caves. Caves were dark and cold. Fire made caves livable. Fire kept animal away. Fire gave light inside cave. Human painted on cave walls using firelight. This was early art. This was early culture, fire and social life. Fire brought people together. People sat around fire, they talked, they shared stories. This was the beginning of language, this was the beginning of tradition. Fire created human society, learned to make fire. At first, human protected natural fire. Later, they learned to make fire. They rubbed stones, they rubbed wood. This was a huge discover. Now fire was always available. Human we are no longer dependent on nature. This was the freedom. Fire and migration. Fire allowed humans to move. They went to good lands. They crossed mountains. Fire helped humans to spread across the world, from Africa to Asia, from Asia to Europe, from Europe to everywhere. Fire helped humans conquering that plant. Fire and religion. Fire became scared. People believe fire was a magic. People worshipped fire. Yes, many religions used fire. Rituals started. Fire became a symbol of life. Fire and farming. Fire helped clear forest. People burned land. This made farming possible. Yes, farming changed human life. People settled down. Villages formed and cities we are born. Are you know? Fast start civilization. Fire and industry. Thousands of years later, fire powered machine, fire boiled water, steam and gas were born. Factories started, trains moved, fire became energy. Fire and modern world. Today, fire still help us. Electric comes from fire. Cooking or users use fire. Industries uses fire, and fire still saves human life. Conclusion: fire is not just that the fire is the history. Fire made humans human. Without fire, there would be no civilization, no cities, no technology. Fast is the greatest discovery in human history. This, thank you today. Now this is a very interesting story. I am feeling very relaxed now, because I am try to very best now to please subscribe, like, and comment. Thank you. Today we will talk about a very old history topic. This story is from a time when there were no house, no cities, no schools, and no books. This is the story of fire. Fire is not just a thing, but that burns. Fire changed everything. Fire made human different from animals. Without fire, there would be no food like today, no protection, no progress, and maybe no modern world. This is the story of how fire slowly changed human life step by step. Long ago, humans were very weak. They had no clothes, no proper homes, and no weapons. They lived in forest and open land. They were always afraid. Big animals hunted them, cold weather, hot there, dark nights scared them. Human ate raw food. Raw meat was hard to chew. Raw plants were bitter and dangerous. People got sick easily. Many people died young. Life was very hard. The first time humans saw fire. Yes, fire was not first made by human. Fire came from nature. Lighting heat trees, volcanoes burned land, dry forest caught fire. Early humans saw fire from far away. They saw bright light. They felt heat. At first, they were scared. Fire was dangerous. Fire burned skin. Fire destroyed trees. But humans are curious. They watched fire carefully. Slowly, humans understood something important. Fire is dangerous, but fire is also useful. Fire give heat, fire give light. People start keeping fire interested of running away. They carried burning wood from natural fire. They portrayed that fire carefully. If fire dead, life became hard again. Fire became like a friend. Fire and warmth. Cold weather was deadly before fire. Winter killed many people. People slept at night. Fire changed this. Fire kept human warmth and people could live in a colder place. They could travel to new lands. Fire helped humans survive winter. This was a very big change in history. Fire and light. Before fire, night was very dark. Darkness brought fear. Wild animal hunted at night. Fire brought light. People could see at night. They could stay together. They could talk and think. This helped humans before social. This helped humans share idea. Fire created community. Fire and protection. Fire scared wild animal. Animal were afraid of flame. They stayed away from fire. Humans used fire as protection. They slept near fire. This saved many lives. Fire became a side. Fire and cooked food. This was one of the biggest change in human history. Yes, human learned to cook food. Cooked meat was soft. Cooked plant were safe. People became stronger. Their brains grew bigger. Good food gave more energy. Scientists believe cooking helped human become intelligent. Fire helped create the human brain. Fire and tools. Fire helped humans make tools. They hardened wood in fire. They shaped stone using heat. Later, fire helped me melt metal. This lead to copper tools. They bronze tools. They iron tools. Fire started technology. Fire and caves. Human lived in caves. Caves were dark and cold. Fire made caves livable. Fire kept animal away. Fire gave light inside cave. Human painted on cave walls using firelight. This was early art. This was early culture. Fire and social life. Fire brought people together. People sat around fire, they talked, they shared stories. This was the beginning of language, this was the beginning of tradition. Fire created human society, learned to make fire. At first, human protected natural fire. Later, they learned to make fire. They rubbed stones, they rubbed wood. This was a huge discovery. Now, fire was always available. Human, we are no longer dependent on nature. This was the freedom. Fire and migration. Fire allowed humans to move. They went to good lands. They crossed mountains. Fire helped humans to spread across the world, from Africa to Asia, from Asia to Europe, from Europe to everywhere. Fire helped humans conquering that plant. Fire and religion. Fire became scared. People believe fire was a magic. People worshipped fire. Yes, many religions used fire rituals started. Fire became a symbol of life. Fire and farming. Fire helped clear forest. People burned land. This made farming possible. Yes, farming changed human life. People settled down. Villages formed and cities we are born. Are you know? Fast start civilization. Fire and industry. Thousands of years later, fire powered machine, fire boiled water, steam and gas were born. Factors started, trains moved, fire became energy. Fire and modern world. Today, fire still help us. Electric comes from fire. Cooking or users use fire. Industries uses fire, and fire still saves human life. Conclusion: fire is not just that the fire is the history. Fire made humans human. Without fire, there would be no civilization, no cities, no technology. Fast is the greatest discovery in human history. This, thank you today. Now this is a very interesting story. I am feeling very relaxed now, because I am try to very best now to please subscribe, like, and comment. Thank you.